Okay, welcome to the semifinals. We've got Craig Maisley piloting his Griselbrand Oath, which we just saw. Jesse Martin playing TPS. Now, Jesse's been playing TPS for about as long as I've known about Vintage, so that's quite a long time. He's a very experienced Storm player. I think this could potentially be a difficult matchup because Oath of Druids is so explosive and has a lot of raw power, a lot of must counters, and Jesse's very light on counter spells. But if anyone can do it, Jesse can do it.
I really like the changes he made to his list. He's been refining it lately, making it a little bit more resilient. Cards like Chrome Mox are at a good number now. He's got the Hurkyl's Recall in there, both to create extra Storm and to answer Blightsteel or the Workshop players. And then some of the other plays that are less greedy, for example, running more preordained compared to Gataxian Probe. Sure, Probe in a gold fishing situation can be really insane where you just draw cards for free, Yogg Will, draw some more cards, but preordained is going to do heavier lifting early and take hands that are really unwinnable and turn them into something you can win off of. Now, in the post-board games, he's got a lot more probes to bring in, and more explosiveness, stuff to answer Dredge, stuff to answer the Workshop decks. I really like where his list is at. It's very interesting. Hopefully he'll do really well with it at the World Championships. TPS tends to be very underrepresented currently because of Mental Misstep. People are just so afraid of running Dark Ritual because it gets countered by Misstep, and a lot of the time that just ends your day.
Yeah. One thing in his sideboard that I think is interesting is he runs 3 Leyline of the Void. I think that's because you don't want multiples of it ever, and he has the ability to go like turn 1 Dark Ritual, Mox Leyline. If he doesn't happen to get it in his opener but then rips it, he can still cast it reasonably with his mana base.
Yeah, it also allows him to have multiple different cards, so he basically has a Jailer instead of a Leyline. So that allows him to have 2 different types of cards that the Dredge player has to answer. I think the Jailer is probably the hardest card for Dredge to answer, so having access to that as a singleton in a deck with so many tutors, more often than not you're going to tutor for a way to win, but if you have to tutor for your hate, that's the guy you're going to want. He also has Pithing Needle, which I'm a huge fan of right now, versus the Workshop decks. It taps for Tangle Wire and names their best card, versus Dredge it shuts off Bazaar, and versus the Time Vault key decks he might bring it in because he's not symmetrical.
So Craig starting off with 2 mana, that could mean a turn 1 Oath, but with no way to trigger the creatures.
Yeah, these are 2 of the most powerful decks in Vintage. Tendrils-based strategy as well as Oath of Druids. Griselbrand versus Storm. Really, a lot of heavy blows can be struck in a match like this. And
we could be seeing a demonic tutor for a Orchard.
Yes,
Forbidden Orchard.
If he has the Oath already. Whichever one he has. If he has the Oath, he can get the Orchard, and vice versa. Or he may just need to be taking a line where he gets some card advantage. He doesn't have all day to dirtle around, though. Versus TPS, if you're letting them go to the 3rd, 4th, 5th turn without really disrupting them, you could be in a world of hurt. They can win, obviously, in a single turn out of almost nowhere.
Yeah. Well, he plays cards like Yawgmoth's Bargain, where once that hits the table, he can just draw he can draw 19 cards.
At least, yeah. There are many times people don't think about with Yawgmoth's Bargain is sometimes you'll draw, 10, 12, 14 cards and then do a mini Tendrils and then continue drawing. You don't have to just get there all in one shot. So a player might be down to 10 life, resolve their bargain, and then still be able to draw a ton of cards. Yeah, this is a very interesting matchup. We'll see what Jesse's able to do. Now, he's got a lot more disruption than his previous lists. Force of Will, he's got the Duresses, Purples, and as well as he does have Mental Misstep. I'm looking for a quantity. I know he's bounced around on the numbers of missteps. I see a couple in the board.
I don't see any in the main deck.
None in the main right now. Okay. I really like his bounce suite here. He's got Chain, Rebuild, and Hurkyl's. So
that's a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and a 3-drop, which is really necessary versus decks where you're expecting like a Chalice of the Void, you know, because you don't know which number they're going to play it for, so you need to be able to deal with any of those.
Yeah, that's a throwback to the earlier TPS builds. I had actually spoken with him earlier about that. He was kind of bouncing around ideas on the Disruption suite, whether or not to do 2 Hercules or what. I mentioned that the older builds used to have it at 1, 2, and 3, and then just kind of talked about the bonuses of each one. Chain of Vapor, able to do so much work. You're able to sack your own artifacts, sack your own lands to bounce your own artifacts, and then bounce their permanent that you're really worried about. Hercules obviously can be used on either player, and then Rebuild does the most work there, bouncing your artifacts and their artifacts, freeing you from a prison lock. But also, the cycling is huge. People don't remember, before Flusterstorm, you could vamp for something like Mind's Desire, and then the correct play was always to counter their card drawing. You wouldn't counter the vamp, you'd counter their Brainstorm or their Ponder or whatever.
Yeah.
And then next turn they'd just draw a Mind's Desire with no gas left. Especially if they're going for a Tendrils, that's just the worst, where you set up this Tendrils turn and then you draw Tendrils the next turn and can't even do anything with it.
Yep.
Now, Flusterstorm exists, so it's not, and Mindbreak Trap. Both of those cards can stop Storm much more effectively. But back in the day, that was a play you'd see all the time. I mean, you'd specifically take that line. If you drew Rebuild, you knew that at some point you were going to just top deck tutor for your Storm spell, and it was just going to be a blowout.
Jesse not showing the camera what he put on top.
Yeah.
I don't know the rest of his hand, so I can't even really make a guess.
There's so many lines that he could be on. He could be on Dark Ritual Necro. That's something you see a lot from this deck. And that's my litmus test for TPS. If it's not where you want to be, if you do not want to turn 1 Necro, draw some cards off of it, and say go, then you should not be playing the deck.
Looks like you got a Tinker.
All right.
So you can
certainly
go for
an option. Tinker Blightsteel
right here with Force Backup.
There you go.
Nice Griselbrand, bro.
Yeah, even if Craig gets Griselbrand, even if he gets Oath, it's not going to matter unless he has Oath Time Walk. Even if he does that, it still could be a problem.
Yeah.
So Blightsteel is a very serious card. You need to find a way of answering it.
I like the inclusion because it gives you a lot of game versus shops, and it's just like a 2-card combo that can win out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's a real trump versus some of the budget decks and some of the aggro decks, just to be able to make the Blightsteel. Now, granted, they're all aware of it. They have to be prepared for it, but it's very rare that they can be prepared for both that and the counter backup. It's so hard to have 2 cards that get rid of Blightsteel.
Yeah, and the one thing about Jesse's list that I think is interesting, I'm going to have to talk to him about it, is he's playing Tinker for Blightsteel, but he does not include Memory Jar, and I think the additional synergy couldn't hurt. But
I got to talk to him a bit about that, actually. I was curious about the lack of Memory Jar, and he really feels like it's just not worth it. The higher you go up on Force of Wills and other Disruption, just the worse Memory Jar gets. There's just too many hands where you move all in on a jar, and you draw a fistful of counters, and it's just not worth it. And Jar is not where you want to be right now in terms of maybe setting up future turns. That's nowhere near good enough. If you make a play like Memory Jar, you need to win this turn. Otherwise, Blightsteel would have been comparable. You're going to win next turn with Blightsteel in most situations anyways. So we've got a Merchant Scroll for Ancestral, indicating that Craig doesn't have the answer for Blightsteel even in the list. Let's take a look. We've got Abrupt Decay and Nature's Claim are his cards of choice there. So yes, that's no answers available.
Needs to Ancestral into like
Jace,
Black Lotus. Yeah. Oh, Jace, yeah. Black Lotus Jace or Black Lotus Time Walk.
Give himself more turns to assemble Vault Key. Yeah, this is desperate. So when someone Merchant Scrolls in a situation like that, you know in all likelihood they don't have Chain of Vapor or Hercules Recall. Or if they do, they already have it in their hand. And at that point, they should definitely be getting a Force of Will.
Yeah.
Like, you don't grab Ancestral and hope to bait the counter. Right. There's just too many people who won't counter it there.
So Jesse taken down game 1 with the new robot. I mean, I say new. He's not new, but it used to be Darksteel Colossus.
Yeah, Blightsteel is just a huge upgrade there. Able to end the game in a single hit, and it's definitely good enough for the TPS lists compared to the Darksteel. World the difference. The downside is he doesn't deal damage, so that doesn't combo with your Tendrils kill, but it just makes the Tinker plan so much more viable to be able to close it out. And it plays so well with Time Walk, it's ridiculous. To be able to Tinker and Time Walk in the same turn now is just a lethal blow.
So how does Leyline of the Void interact with both the druids?
Well, it gets rid of a lot of their options, but you're just revealing until you hit the creature, so it's not going to break up the play at all. What it could do is mill out Craig of viable options. For example, if he just ends up with a Griselbrand, you can't mark any good stuff because it's all been removed. But that's not really where you'd want to be.
So maybe he's bringing in mental missteps.
I think missteps, probes, so he knows how to play.
Chain of Vapor.
Defense grid. He's definitely going to be able to get rid of Hercules and rebuild. Those are not really going to be necessary versus Craig. He probably keeps the Chain of Vapor to buy himself some extra turn.
I saw him take out a Chrome Mox because it's card disadvantage.
Yep.
A lot of times the sacrifice for speed is not worth the disadvantage. Let's see. I'm going to guess he takes out some number of Force of Will. Well, he definitely takes out the Hercules Recall, like you said, and he took out a Chrome Mox. He probably leaves in Force of Will.
Oh yeah, he definitely needs the Force. Even bringing in Defense Grid, you still need Force. There's just too many openings from Craig that can just win the game. So if you can force their first turn Oath, you're going to do it. And then on Craig's side of the board, he's looking at whether or not to bring in Leyline of the Void to try and stop the Yawgmoth's Will style kills. He's got Nile Spellbomb, which is probably the better option to shut off Yawgmoth's Will. And then Steel Sabotage, Hercules Recall, Nature's Claim, and Rav Trap. Overall, I would say Nile Spellbomb, totally reasonable. Everything else is kind of on the fringe there. You don't really want a bunch of Hercules Recalls in your deck versus a deck with Tinker Blightsteel.
Yeah.
It's just not that good. And they don't always win with the Tinker Blightsteel. So a lot of the time you'll get stuck with that in hand, and it'll kill you with a Tendrils.
So it looks like Jesse brought in just the 2 missteps and the 2 probes, opting for a more Phyrexian mana type of game. And I bet you he brought out the rebuild as well as the Chain of Vapor.
Well, I think Chain could possibly be left in because it will buy that turn versus the Oath.
I meant Hercules Recall.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think we're on the same page there then. We'll see if Jesse is on the same page as well. In terms of Craigslist, it's interesting because it's very likely that he'd be boarding out the Abrupt Decay and Nature's Claim because they have very few targets in the main deck. However, that could leave him very cold to a defense grid later on. So if Jesse's able to land a defense grid, that may essentially make all of his spells uncounterable for that turn and any turns going forward. So we'll see how this plays out. Craig doesn't have a ton of counters, but a card like Flusterstorm really gets shut down by defense grid. If you can't get to 4 mana, you've got a huge problem.
Right. And that's also the beauty of Jesse plays Duress, which is it's similar to what you described earlier with Craig taking Abrupt Decays out of people's hands. It's like, yeah, it's just that's the one. Abrupt Decay is the one card that matters, and I'll just take it before it matters.
Yeah. It's the discard from the Oath decks. I really like where that's at. I actually prefer Duress over Thoughtseize right now, just because I like the lists that are running 4 total. But Craig's been running Misdirection instead of additional discard, and so far it's worked out really well for him. I've seen him snag a bunch of Ancestrals, even though it's only a single Misdirection. That card does a lot of work, and it can also force through your Oath early, as well as give protection against Abrupt Decay. So it's an interesting spot to be in. Not only does it have a lot of uses in terms of protecting your combo, but it can really hinder your opponent as well.
Now, Misdirection being a more prevalent card in Vintage also increases the value of Duress over Thoughtseize.
That's true, absolutely. Yeah, the Duress, they can misdirect Duress. It just doesn't end the way that they want.
Not a good time.
Yes.
Well, it is for the person casting the Duress.
Yeah, those are feel bads.
I've had one of those in my life. I duressed someone and he misdirected it, and I was just like, I had to call the judge over because I didn't want him to take it back.
Yeah, it's really It's pretty brutal. Bad interaction.
What picture of duress do you like the most?
Saga. Yeah.
There's a Saga?
Not close. Yeah, I really like the Saga one the most.
I like the M10 picture the most.
Yeah, it's a nice picture. I mean, if you were asking me which picture is better, I would say the M10. But if you're asking me which one I like more, I like the original one. There's a lot of memories there. You know, it's kind of similar to the Ancestral painting for the new World Championships. That painting, I think, is clearly better than the original Ancestral art. Mm-hmm. But I like the original more. If I had to have an Ancestral in my deck, I would choose to have the original art compared to the new art because there's that much history.
All the nostalgia.
Yep. And to an extent, I don't know, muscle memory is not the correct term, but the difference in between playing with proxies or playing with new art and, you know, when I draw Ancestral or I draw Mana Drain, I have kind of an emotional response where I have like this network of games in my head where it's like, this is what happens when you have Mana Drain. Almost like a safety to it. You know what I mean? Like you feel safer having the misdirection or this, you know, whatever card you have.
Yeah.
That doesn't fire the same way with me with new art or with proxies. So when I have the cards that I've been playing with for almost 2 decades, it feels different, and I don't necessarily have to think it through. Compared to, you know, if I was playing with all new art, I wouldn't get any of those emotional responses. I'd still be able to reason it out. But it's the difference in between being able to intuitively know something and having to like do the math to see where you stand.
Right. I mean, I've definitely seen a lot of people try to like figure their deck out the day of a tournament, and that's just not where you want to be. You know, like you need to take the time to practice and get your reps in so that like the basic plays of the deck are just like muscle memory at that point where you're just going through the motions. Like you can't be like, oh well, is this, you know, am I going to get to enough storm if I play all these spells? You have to just know.
Well, Jesse's storing some cards in his lap, hopefully not for later. No, he's got them all. We're all good. Yeah, I agree completely. And what happens too is when you have things memorized and in a sense that you've been there and you've done it, you're not second guessing things. When you take, I don't want to get too scientific here, but some of the studies that they've done on championship chess players, the brain activity that they exercise is actually less than moderately skilled chess players because all they're evaluating are the lines of play that actually matter. The people who are knowledgeable enough to see all of the different lines but haven't quite eliminated all of the bad lines have to work so much harder, and that's very similar in Magic. You know, you pick up a Storm deck and you haven't been playing it very often, you see every single possible line, and in Magic, that could drive you nuts trying to think through all of them. A card like Demonic Tutor could be literally any other card in your deck. So to be able to eliminate all of the bad lines and just focus on the optimal ones, that's a huge, huge benefit, and especially in a timed game like Magic, where you only have 50 minutes in the round.
Yeah, it's not like it's just like infinite time. It's you have to quickly and efficiently make the best decisions throughout the course of the game. Otherwise, you're just gonna lose. Jesse going to a brave 4.
Whew. Well, this is the type of list that can do that, and honestly can't win off of a bad 5 very easily.
Yeah.
So can't disagree with that. Yeah, for a lot of decks,
don't go to 3.
You don't. You don't go to 3. But a lot of decks won't even go to 4.
Yeah.
It really depends on what you're trying to do and what the matchup is.
Well, he could end up with like a turn 1 like ritual, land ritual, necro.
Yeah, absolutely, totally possible. Or ancestral even. I mean, there's so many cards that can pull you back in the game.
Or even if he had like, no, that doesn't work with 4 cards. I'm trying to think of a 4-card hand where he gets to duress and play necro.
Swamp, duress, Lotus, necro.
Okay, there it is.
No problem.
Got it. That's what Jesse's got.
So we got a Time Walk. Craig, ooh, that's dangerous.
Spicy.
Now, it would be interesting here to see if Craig at any point decides to untap the... Oh, we got Probe. Show and Tell and Orchard from the vault, correct?
Yes. You can see that sort of like vertical foiling shine.
So Craig is threatening a win anytime he draws Voltaic Key.
And what's interesting is he can show and tell the Voltaic Key as like a counter backup.
Yes.
To play around like Force or something, because like, oh, you can, if you let show and tell resolve, he has Voltaic Key. If you counter show and tell, he still just plays Voltaic Key. And he has enough mana to do all that in one turn.
Yeah, it's very likely that he would make that play if he drew the Voltaic Key. It actually is at its most dangerous versus Jesse because he does have a copy of Yawgmoth's Bargain,
Right.
and that could lead to a blowout. It could get really gross if Jesse gets a bargain and then draws a ton of cards and then finds an answer to your untap of the Time Vault. That could be a beating. And he does have answers. He has Chain of Vapor and Hurkyl's Recall potentially.
I think I traded Jesse that Preordain.
Pithing Needle could also be a problem.
Yes. Does Jesse run Pithing Needle? I don't think he does.
He does, and it's not symmetrical.
Oh, he does. Yeah.
It's not like when you're playing Time Vault versus a Time Vault deck. Like there's anything he's gonna name, Jace, Time Vault, Key, any of that is not gonna Griselbrand even.
Yep. Doesn't hurt him.
Yeah. And Jesse's not really worried about the attacking for 7 every turn of Griselbrand, so he could definitely bring in Pithing Needle there just to hedge against it.
Interesting.
Let's see where Jesse goes from here. He's got a dangerous opposing side, but not as dangerous as you'd like from Craig.
His
really
opponent just has show and tell mystery cards, so anything Jesse does right now could potentially go uncontested.
Yeah, when you're not able to stop the TPS deck from doing what it's doing, it's very, very dangerous. A Brainstorm could literally just draw into the win. Those 3 cards, there's so many different combinations that could just end it. Brainstorm, thinking it through.
Yep.
You know, it's from Craig's side of the board, not having any disruption here is very dangerous. That Time Walk really didn't do very much.
No, unfortunately for Craig.
You know, that's one of those cards that can be so good in Oath where you're able to land an Oath and Time Walk, untap, win the game. But when it just cycles, it really doesn't do very much there. So it's not like you've got attackers out. Let's see where Jesse's at. He's certainly giving it a go for a mull to 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, TPS is one of those decks. I actually am not interested in playing it right now because of how good I think Mental Misstep is. But it's also a very valid choice.
And I found that in both Legacy and Vintage, there are a school of people who are going to play Storm no matter what. Those dedicated players that are really just it keeps people honest because you can't, when a deck goes away because of cards like Mental Misstep, then we start to see the format skew a bit, but TPS is just sticking around.
Yeah, the Tendrils-based Storm decks, you've got to be able to have game against them. You can't just auto-lose to them. And I agree. There's definitely going to be people who still play them. We saw that earlier list with the Helm combo in the sideboard.
Yeah.
There's lots of different ways of trying to make it all come together.
Vintage Storm. Vintage combo.
So we got a Mark Teeden altered Juzam Mana Crypt.
Yep.
Activating that Tolarian Academy, so he's got the blue out of it. We've got a blue and 2 colorless Tinker would be fine. Oh, Time Walk. All right.
Time Walk's good too.
Time
he
Walk.
He knows what's on top.
He does know. Now he may have a Vamp or a Mystical in hand. That could potentially work out.
Well, So what? So Craig's showing us. Oh, because he probed. That's right. Vamp and
Show and Tell.
Show and Tell.
Pretty well now or never.
Yeah.
He needs to do something really relevant. Let's see what he's able to do here. Passing the turn will be lethal.
Yep.
Unless he has some kind of play to break it up. And
Ponder.
it looks like, yeah, Craig has so much mana that even a Hurkyl's Recall wouldn't matter. Right?
So Jesse Hurkyl's recalls in response to the untap, and then so it's 1 mana to play it, 1 mana to untap it, and then he would be able to replay his Mox and still have 3 mana available. So he'd be able to play it, untap it with a mana floating. Yeah. But he won't be able to show and tell and play it. If Jesse has, he won't be able to show and tell, play the Voltaic Key, and untap it.
Actually, the Hurkyl's will break it up, though, because you'll have to pay the 1 to untap.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that would leave him with 2 lands, getting the Mox back. So, yeah, I mean, he could potentially buy himself 1 turn here with a timely bounce spell, but Craig would still have Vault Key in play at the end of that turn.
Yep.
So
So
we
we
would
got
be back
2
in
blue.
the same boat. 2 blue, 2 colorless. What do we got? Whoa!
Twister!
That's spicy.
Yeah, go ahead and vamp. Free Storm. Vamping right now is double Storm.
Yes, yeah. And that's actually interesting because Craig... Oh, is Craig actually considering this? He's not thinking it through.
Think about it.
Think. You're gonna shuffle. Don't do it.
Well, he's fetching.
Okay.
He's fetching. That
That's
might
fine.
not be.
That could be totally reasonable.
I mean, he pulls a land out to put a land back in, but...
Well, let's see here. If he drew all of his dual lands, then that fetch could be dead.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
a possibility. So it could actually deny him mana. So not an unreasonable play at all to
He's
fetch
not
there.
just shuffling everything together. He's thinking about vamping. Okay, he's
Okay.
not thinking about vamping. Good job, Craig.
That would have been gruesome.
Yep.
So Jesse goes from near death to a full 7
With a blue floating.
Hasn't made a land drop.
Yeah.
So this is probably, I mean, this is exactly what the deck is designed to do. He should be able to win off of these 7. That's the goal. Now, it's fortunate for Craig that he didn't decide to main phase that Vampiric Tutor, which would have been a reasonable play.
Yeah.
Because that would have played around Jesse drawing Mental Misstep.
Mm-hmm.
So, very interesting. That slight play could have made a huge difference. Craig would have been down to just 16, and that could end up making a difference here.
I mean, going from 19 to 18 is relevant as well. So what's Storm so far? It's just Mox, Time Twister, Probe. No, Probe was last turn.
Yeah, but he did Ponder this turn, didn't he?
Oh yeah, Mox, Ponder, Twister. So Storm.
Yeah, Mana Crypt. But yeah, we're splitting hairs at that point. The last turn was Emerald Academy Time Walk. And then he untapped.
No, because he lost the 3 life this turn off of the Mana Crypt.
Okay. So he had 1 floating last turn. That makes sense. Interesting.
Now what has he got going on?
Wonder why he would do it that way then. Because he brainstormed, so he saw all the cards. That's very interesting. Well, he play around days. Alright, brainstorm with the blue, with nothing floating here. 1 green up.
Storm of
Have not
4.
played a land. Now, these are 2 of the most powerful decks in the format. I cannot imagine that Craig's hand would not be good enough to win. Giving him 7 cards with Time Vault in play.
And
passing
4
here.
lands in the Orchard, like... passing the turn is just not an option.
Passing is almost certainly lethal. It would be extremely bad luck to have it not be good enough for Craig.
Right.
Or good luck for Jesse.
Yeah.
If you believe in luck. Whatever you want to call it.
It'd be good science.
There you go.
So let's see.
Nothing
Fetching
is
away. I'm on the edge of my seat right now.
Yeah, this is exciting.
I don't even want to say anything because I'm worried I'll distract myself and miss an awesome play.
Oh, we got mystical, ancestral. Got a dark ritual in there. We have options, and then on Craig's side, Craig shielding.
Definitely see the mystical and ancestral.
Yeah, more mana would be helpful for Jesse here.
Yeah.
Time Walk could be an option, get an untap and then get a massive amount of mana off of it, but does not look like that's going to be an option. He could Ancestral into the nuts.
Yeah.
And maybe his only play here. He really can't afford to pass the turn. And I certainly don't think you pass without playing the Ancestral. That seems really bad. Oh!
Lotus Petal.
That's big.
Now stuff can happen.
That's potentially very big. So we have access to double blue.
Storm of 5.
So we're looking at the ability to mystical and ancestral into what you're looking for. Now he has made that land drop. What do we got here?
3 mana.
Yawgmoth's Will, no longer interesting. Twister taking care of that. Dark Ritual. Well, actually, now that I say that, he could Twister again. If he Yawg Wills here, he can replay the Lotus Petal, and then Dark Ritual, and then Twister again. Which I would be in favor of, if he's able to do that.
So he's got access to 5 mana. Tinker for Lotus. Using a green, a blue, and a black, so he's floating 2 black.
Yeah, these are the times where you really feel like Memory Jar would be amazing.
Yep.
You have Mystical for your tendrils, and then crack the jar.
He's got Storm of 6, I want to say. So he cracks for triple blue, Ancestrals, tendrils. Right? 6, 7, 8. No, he needs one more spell. Unless I miscounted.
Because he has... need an Abacus here. He has 3 black.
You should have 2 black floating right now.
2 black, 3 blue?
Nothing float. Well,
did he have a colorless from the Mana Crypt from before?
No, he's used that. No, he floated a blue off that. Because he went Mana Crypt.
Okay, yeah.
And Tolarian.
So yeah, it's a question of how much mana he has here.
I'm pretty sure he's just floating double black.
Yeah, if it's just double black, then he'd have to hit a mana source off of the Ancestral in the 2 cards underneath.
Or Gitaxian Probe.
Yeah, Probe does it.
Or a Mental Misstep, and he missteps his own Ancestral.
Oh, he has to get the card off of the Mystical into his hand.
Yeah. So he could. Oh,
there you go.
Ritual.
That'll do.
So he can Mystical for Yawgwell, Ancestral.
We're already going over the top.
Yeah.
Forget about just getting the tendrils and killing them. Now we're going Yawgwell. We'll see which way he goes. Either one would be lethal. Now he's got the single single tendrils here, post board.
Is Craig just like F6 right now? Because I think, well, I don't know. I don't know if I would have, like, which of those spells I would have countered. I don't know if I would have countered any of those spells. That's the tough thing about playing against Storm.
So this is exactly what I was talking about with Rebuild, where you'd normally just counter the card that they. So like if he had Rebuild in hand and he got Tendrils and he had enough mana, he could just cycle into it.
Yeah.
Whereas here, Craig's thinking like I'm gonna counter the Ancestral or Probe or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Yawgmoth's Will. I like it. Way over the top.
Yeah, because at this point he could have just got Tendrils. But, oh, no. Yawgwill is better because if Ancestral gets countered here and he doesn't win, then he gets to untap in Yawgwill instead of just have a stupid Tendrils on top.
Absolutely. And the Ancestral allows him to potentially draw a counter. Griselbrand, DT. Womp womp.
Nothing that matters. His opponent reveals a handshake.
Yeah. Yeah, so that DT for the DT for Voltaic key would have happened, just he had to win right there.
Yeah.
And his deck was able to support him in that endeavor. Yeah, the Ancestral there, absolutely. I mean, either way, you're probably going to lose if you pass the turn, but having Yawgwill on top is much, much better than having just a dead Tendrils for sure.
Right. Well, that was an exciting match. Can't wait to see the finals. I hope you're just as excited as I am, and we'll see you in the next round.